Welcome back, Tubies, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's premier all things Charles Band podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, coming to you, as always, from Brooklyn, New York. And who is co-piloting this mech with me today?
Well, that's me, Steve Guntley, here in the control center in Austin, Texas. This is a podcast all about rattle rooms, bolo saws, and Achilles. That is to say, this is a podcast about Robot Jox. I'm very excited to be talking about this movie. And we actually have a special guest here to join us and give us a little bit of background history on this movie. Who's joining us, Jared?
So, our guest today, super excited to have this guest in studio with us here, although not in the studio. He's in the meeting with us, but he's in the studio in spirit.
Yeah.
He is a formally trained film studies and production at Hofstra University entertainment industry professional. He has produced all kinds of scripted and unscripted comment, and he is a wealth of information when it comes to movies in general, but these types of movies specifically. I'm talking, of course, about Mr. John Torrani. John, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Yes, I have produced both scripted and unscripted content. I mostly work in unscripted content. So I am not affected by the writer's strike.
Oh, that's good at least.
Yeah.
That was, it's funny. With my lead-in, I was actually going to ask you that. I was going to say I was curious about scripted content and what that meant for you at this moment. But that's good to know that you're not particularly personally affected by it.
It means business is booming. Everyone. So if anyone has an idea for a reality show, a documentary, now's the time to pitch it.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one. So there's this guy who makes these little puppets that come to life. And they can do the bidding of other people. We make them date each other.
Oh, I
think this works.
Yeah. And have you run that by Charles?
Not yet, but I feel like he'd be into that idea. I think like a Puppet Love Island, I think would be pretty fun, actually.
I was just with him in Dallas, Texas 2 weeks ago.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and I could tell you that he would be into that idea.
I don't think either of us are surprised. But
right,
John,
patent pending.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you on to talk about the movie that we're going to talk about today. Before we get too much into the meat and potatoes of it, Steve, why don't you fire off a couple stats about Robot Jox for us?
Absolutely. Well, first, the nitty-gritty. This movie was released November 11th, 1990. It was directed by Stuart Gordon, written by Joe Haldeman, and it stars Gary Graham, Anne Marie Johnson, Paul Koslow, Robert Sampson, Danny Kamikona, Hilary Mason, and Michael Aldridge. And right from the top, I want to say that one of the things that really made me excited about doing this podcast was the fact that we would end up just kind of organically covering almost all of Stuart Gordon's filmography. Like there's a handful of movies from the post Full Moon era, but we're covering a really good amount of them, and we're covering some of the very best ones. Stuart Gordon is one of those filmmakers who he is 100% like a B-movie auteur, but he always feels like one of those guys who could have broken through if he wanted to, like, more mainstream fare. I mean, he kind of did. He wrote Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, lest we forget. Like, that is his screenplay. But
we're gonna talk about that. That's gonna come up in my notes. I have notes about that.
Can't wait.
Because I think he's a fascinating guy. He's one of these directors. I think the closest comparison is to like Paul Verhoeven, because in both cases, these are guys who make movies that on their face look like the dumb kind of B movies that they're selling to you, but they're just so good at capturing that actual feel and making it actually entertaining that sometimes the satire just goes right over your head, and it takes like years and years to come back and reappraise it. Verhoeven's the same way, and Gordon is very much in that camp. So I'm really excited to talk about him.
Stuart Gordon is a guy who I saw a bunch of his movies as a kid, but I didn't really have a sense of him as a filmmaker until, I got older, and you go back and you revisit some stuff you were into when you were younger, and you're kind of like, okay, I can understand how I enjoyed this concept, but this isn't particularly good. Stuart Gordon is one of those guys who I grew to be even more fond as an adult of his films, even the ones I saw as a kid. And Steve and I have spent a lot of time in the first few shows kind of waxing nostalgic about our history with horror movies and B movies, exploitation, independent cinema. So, John, I just want to give you sort of our introductory question, which is, what is your history with low budget cinema, horror genre? Like, where did it really begin for you? Like, the times you and I have met, we've met in circumstances where we're around a lot of people in the horror industry or creative types, and we have, mutual friends who are into it. But I just want to know, like, where did that journey start for you?
That's a great question, and I can explain it. I have what I call my wake-up movies, and what those are, my parents always had a love of film, and they always encouraged my appreciation of film, and they always made it they were never really like, we're gonna watch the latest blockbuster. That really wasn't what they were into. They were always watching kind of obscure things and seeking things out, and really their tastes really aren't, I wouldn't call, mainstream. And because of that, they always had the best cable package you could possibly get, because they didn't like going to the theater. That's not true. They like to go to the theater. They like to go to art houses. They don't like multiplexes. They do not like the multiplex. So they always made sure we had the best cable package possible. Now, they also liked their time alone watching films, so I always had to go to bed early. Now, the flip side of that is I would wake up early. So when you wake up early, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, there are still movies on from the night before that are playing on Showtime, Cinemax, all these premium channels. They would just kind of have movies. So I would see things that, obviously, I mean, at this point, I'm 8, 9, 10 years old, and I'm seeing things that I definitely are too mature for me. One example of a film I saw from waking up early that always stuck with me is Coffee, Pam Grier's Coffee. Weird film to have seen at a 8, 9, 10 years old, where you're one, it's even though it's directed by Jack Hill, who's a white person, this was my exposure to black cinema, and this is a very weird introduction to this, as coming from a white suburban middle class family, seeing pimps, things like this. It's just a very jarring, but also an intriguing world, and that's one of the films I saw. But to stay on topic, two of the films that I saw were Doll Man and Robot Jox from Waking Up Early. So that was my real introduction, was just getting up early and finding films on cable that were just kind of not like anything else that I was watching. So even though I was young, I never liked what was for me. I always wanted to see, what was subversive, what was different. That was always important to me. So waking up like this, I saw Dirty Harry, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. These are just a few of the things that I remember waking up early to watch.
That's a really interesting point, because I feel like I sort of did the same thing. Like, I would get up for school, and if I got up early or if I got dressed and ready quickly, I would kind of just flip the TV on too. And you find some weird stuff in the early hours of the morning that spill over from the night before. And Steve and I talked a little bit in our other episodes about, for us, really, it was, I mean, definitely partially cable, but really the allure of the VHS cover art and perusing the video store too. And so for John, for you, was that something too? Was that formative for you?
Oh, of course. Well, the thing is, I always loved the video store, and my parents would go to the video store because there were times when they would say, "Hey, remember that movie?" And then we would go out to rent it. And sometimes we'd be allowed to pick. Sometimes myself or one of my siblings would be allowed to pick something. Sometimes not. But of course, the VHS box was there are movies that I remember the box, but that I've never actually seen. So I am a huge physical media proponent. And that's something that we're going to get into when I talk about my involvement with the Arrow release of Robot Jox. But I always loved the video store, and when I was 17, I got a job at the local independent video store because my uncle was friends with the owners. Not friends. My uncle was a business partner of the owner's brother. So at 17, I had full reign over this video store. They gave me the keys to it immediately, I guess, again, because of the family connection. And this was not a Blockbuster. This was an independently owned and operated video store with the porno room and everything. So it was so yes, the VHS runs through my veins. The video store is something very important to me, and it was the best job that I ever had, and I do often dream of working in the video store. You can't see it behind. We're in my office right now, but I happen to, in my home, I've constructed shelves for my VHS and my other physical media. Many of my VHS is from the store that I worked at.
Is that the Jason Lives Jason NECA toy behind you on the shelf?
You know, every time I do a podcast, someone points at something behind me that I always say is, why'd you care about that? Because it's standing next to a Jason Lives effects bust made by John Carl Buechler. So,
well, to be fair, that one was behind your head.
Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't see that until you moved just now.
This is one of the pigs from Stuart Gordon's Space Truckers.
Oh my god.
And then this is
the From Beyond poster, yeah.
Well, it's not a From Beyond poster. This is the original artwork for the From Beyond Vestron VHS release that was not used. So the artist is by artist Corey Wolf, who did the artwork for Vestron's Kindred, the baby bottle with like the monster in it. So yeah, that was used. This one was not. So, but I was able to purchase this from him. I'm a very big collector. I love original things. We'll get into that also later, because that's kind of how I got involved with Arrow and their oh my god, I'm blanking on the name of it. So I have it right here. It's Arrow's Videos, Enter the Video Store, Empire of Screams box set. That's how I got it. I was involved with that because I own a lot of the original production items from Robot Jox.
So this is super exciting because we've been talking with people who've wanted to discuss Empire and Full Moon movies, and we've professed our love for it. But this is fun for us because this is sort of like a little, behind the scenes, a little inside baseball where we get to see some of these awesome original artwork and original props. So super excited, John, to see what kind of stuff you got here. And I guess, Steve, do you want to give us before we talk too much about the specifics? Why don't you tell us a little bit about like Robot Jox as a film, like just on the surface for maybe listeners who are not familiar with this movie. What's this movie about?
Absolutely. So Robot
Before you
Jox,
answer, I'm judging you. I'm judging you based on your answer.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, they're holding up signs. They're getting ready like, 10.0. I'm not going to get a 10.0. So this is a movie that takes place post the nuclear apocalypse. There was about 50 years after the nuclear winter, and now all of the world's governments have just been reduced to two warring factions. One of them is the Confederation, which is basically standing in for the Soviet Union, and the other is the Market, which is standing in for the United States, or all Western capitalist countries, basically. And they have decided that in order to shore up their population and help the process of rebuilding, they are going to settle all conflicts, instead of with wars, with large one-on-one robot battles. Now, I'm not going to go into where they get the resources to build and fuel these large robots, or if that's actually more practical than fighting a war. Either way, that's the way disputes are handled now. these large mechs are piloted by what we call Robot Jox, just normal human beings who are taking control of these machines and duking it out with all their special weapons and laser beams. Every Robot Jock is signed to a 10-fight contract, and currently the best person in the game is fighting for the market side, and that's a guy named Achilles. He's played by Gary Graham here. He's kind of our chiseled hero. I think he kind of looks like a heroin chic Mark Harmon, but I like his vibe. He's got
I was getting Scott Glenn and the Right Stuff vibes.
A little Scott Glenn,
him.
A little Lance Henriksen, just like
a
your
little
classic,
Billy
like,
Bob Thornton.
Yeah, a little bit of your classic, like, handsome but dehydrated looking man.
And I was trying to figure out where it was that I knew him from primarily, which would be Alien Nation.
Right, yes. A show I never saw, but I was definitely aware of that when it was on. And we know that Achilles' big rival in the Confederation is a ruthless Russian named Alexander, who has a propensity to stomp on his victims after he's defeated them, because he's really super hardcore. But Achilles is kind of the last wave of the traditional Robot Jox, because the market and the Confederation have started investing heavily in test tube teens from the year 2000. They are starting to breed these super warriors in test tubes and train them for nothing else but to be superior robot pilots. And that next wave is coming in as Achilles is facing his retirement. But one day in a conflict with Alexander, a cheap shot happens. Achilles jumps in front of a projectile to keep it from hitting the bandstand, but unfortunately the projectile knocks him over. He falls on the bandstand and crushes, I think they said 300 civilians, something like that. Yeah. A still pretty shocking scene for a PG movie. The fact that, like, they're falling on this crowd and crushing.
Hey, listen, they signed waivers, all right? They put themselves in harm's
bums.
way. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, and so then it becomes, Achilles tries to retire out of shame, out of PTSD, out of, a sense of defeat, but he gets goaded back into the game where he's going to need to face down Alexander once and for all for control of the Alaska territories. That's kind of a general overview. That's kind of the important stuff you need to know. Like, a lot of the details will shake out, and we get a lot of crazy combat scenes and things like that. But yeah, there's an interesting conflict at play in this movie, and I think that comes from the division between Stuart Gordon and the writer Joe Haldeman. So Joe Haldeman is a Nebula Award-winning writer. He wrote a novel called The Forever War back in the 70s. Stuart Gordon met him when he was working on a TV series adaptation of that novel that never took off. But they stayed close, and so he hired him on to write the script for this. But they both had pretty diametrically opposed ideas of what they wanted this movie to be. Basically, the way that Joe Haldeman says it is he wanted to make an adult movie that children could enjoy, and Stuart Gordon wanted to make a children's movie that adults could enjoy. And that doesn't sound like a huge difference, but it kind of is in the way that you approach it. And so I think Robot Jox ultimately has a little bit of a mishmash of tones going on that I think it generally overcomes. But it is something that you face off when you have these, like, admittedly goofy-looking giant robots, like, punching and kicking each other, and then it's interspersed with, like, a moment like the bandstand crushing that is kind of a genuinely tragic and upsetting moment to happen in a movie like this, and it's very impactful. Yeah.
And John, I'm happy to have you here because I feel like this is something you can shed some light on. So Steve and I both have professed earlier in the show about being fans of Empire and Full Moon, being really curious about Charles Band's career and projects he's been involved in. We both read Confessions of a Puppet Master. We both read It Came from the Video Aisle, and we've both done research of other things. So this was a pretty expensive movie, the most expensive Empire movie at the time. I think Stuart Gordon said the actual budget was $6.5 million, which
and
is
some estimates say as much as 10.
As much as 10. While we were in our interviews, they said it was initially, I think it was like that what they told us, what we heard from interview. I can only tell you what, according to the interviews that we got, it was started out at 7 and then ballooned to 9.5. So what I can tell you from a magazine article that I have, which appeared in Cinefantastique's January of 1989, issue by someone named David Fisher was that the film was basically in production for 2.5 years. And what I could and the proof that I have of that is some of the original art that I own is dated 1986.
And we do need to say, for Charles Band, that is an unheard of production time.
Yes.
Like, that is far and away longer than any other film that he's worked on.
Well, I would say, now, I don't want to get too far into Empire and the dealings behind Empire, because we're talking about Robot Jox. The thing is, the story of Empire and the story of Robot Jox are kind of intertwined, because as Empire is going through whatever financial difficulty it is, for whichever reasons that it is, Robot Jox kind of ends up in a limbo where they have to stall the production, and then they get their money back. They're able to finish principal photography. However, effects master David Allen needs to, as the director of the second unit, finish all of these effect shots, some of which are stop motion, some of which are rod puppets. They elected to shoot all of them out in the desert with natural lighting, which presented its own slew of challenges, but to me, I think ultimately makes the film look better and makes the miniatures look more real.
Yeah, so the reason I brought up the budget is because to me, there's a lot of times where this movie looks really good and you can see where the money went.
Yes.
And I just wondered that in the research that I've done about the company, there's barely a word about this movie. It came from the video aisle as more Full Moon, so there's very little about Empire that they talk about, unless it's an Empire movie that became a franchise that bled into Full Moon. But in Charles Band's book, he doesn't really talk about Robot Jox at all, and I'm surprised for such a big budget movie.
Well, and I could say there's a couple of reasons for that. Is because I don't want to say he was distracted. I would say he probably was distracted with the financial concerns, and there reaches a point where he's not involved anymore. Like, by the time they finish principal photography, I would say, by everything that I know, everything I've read, everything I've seen, all the interviews we've had, he probably at that point is not involved anymore for one reason or another. So it basically, I would say, was Stuart Gordon's movie through production, and then it became David Allen's movie as we got into post-production. And mind you, this is happening over the course of 2.5 years. So, and mind you, now, it was my job to moderate a panel about Empire at Texas Frightmare Weekend 2 weeks ago in Dallas. Charles Band was on the panel, and I said, "Is there anything you don't want me to talk about?" And he said, "No, ask me anything." I said, "Okay." Now, a lot of people would have taken that as an opportunity to be like, what happened with Empire? I wasn't really interested in doing that. I feel that's its own story that needs its own set of attention. I wanted to focus on the stories about the movies that were on the set, which Arrow was making exclusively available 1 month early to the Texas Frightmare crowd. So I was there with Jeffrey Byron, Dennis Paoli. Now, Dennis Paoli, who's the screenwriter of Reanimator and From Beyond, did a pass on the Robot Jox script. So I don't know, and he warned me. He said, Joe Haldeman probably didn't like that. He's not credited. Paoli's not credited. He has a special thanks. But he gave Stuart notes on the script. So for me now, my white whale in my Robot Jox fandom and my involvement now, with be it as limited as it may be, I need to talk to Joe Haldeman about Robot Jox and find out exactly what exactly it is that he doesn't like, what was his, what was Paoli's, what was Stewart's, etc.
Now, was this kind of the severing of the relationship between Gordon and Haldeman, or did they kind of mend ways after production of this wrapped up?
To my knowledge, everything. Now, when you said that there was a rift between them, that took me by surprise, because actor Gary Graham basically said that made it seem that they were simpatico or simpatico, whatever. And they had a close working relationship throughout the production. So much so that the two of them kind of teamed up against Gary. That's a story that we have on the Blu-ray, so I'm not going to go into the full story. But basically, Stuart and Gary signed on to the film. The film had one ending. Then, over the course of production, Stuart and Haldeman teamed up and said, "We want to change the ending to what it is now." And Gary was like, "I don't like that. I hate that." And they talked him into it. And then Gary shot it and then regrets it. So basically, Gary wanted his ending and still thinks it's a good ending. Now, I can tell you, as someone who was watching the film at 10, I would have preferred Gary's ending. But now, as a grown-up, I like the ending that it is. You know, I don't know if I just learned to like the ending or
it beat you down into submission. You just got used to it.
Yes.
You saw it so many times.
I like it, and I can't imagine the film any other way.
It's really got one of those abrupt, like, Karate Kid endings where you always forget, like, just how suddenly this movie ends. You know, like there's a lot of dressing that could still be kind of tied up, but we get the gist.
Yes, and the thing that I mentioned on the panel that Charles Band didn't like. No. See, when I talk about this stuff, I don't like saying it's awesome. Let's talk about the top 10 best whatever. I don't like you mentioned. I'm formally trained in film criticism and film study, so I try to elevate the stuff I talk about and come to it slightly more intellectually. So the thing that I love about this movie and I love about Joe Haldeman, this is what I want to ask him about, is that the film has a timelessness where let's look at it's clearly out of Cold War hysteria, the film.
Yeah.
Okay. The idea conceived in 1986. Okay. We're still in the Cold War. That is still there's still we're 5 years away from the Berlin Wall coming down. We're 5 years away from the end of the Soviet Union. You look at other films from the 80s, the Rocky Fours, the
Jim Cotta.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I was gonna say, that's like my I've been saying in everything I do about Robot Jox. I say Rocky IV, Red Dawn, and dare I say Jim Cotta. Those are all dated. Those all are set clearly in the 80s. They are so 80s they cannot get any more 80s. And when you watch them now, it's like that was the 80s. What's great about Robot Jox is it doesn't reference the Cold War specifically. It just says after the nuclear holocaust.
Right.
And the sad thing is we are now closer to a nuclear holocaust than we were in 1990 when the film actually got released. And now, in reality, whether we want to admit it or not, we are in Cold War II. Congratulations.
Essentially we are.
We are in Cold War II. So this film could conceivably take place 50 years from now. It doesn't have that 80s time stamp. It has a timelessness working for it.
I will agree with you.
You do also just have to feel bad for the movie a little bit because I think it did get a little shafted by all of the production troubles and all of the, with Empire shutting down and the licenses changing hands, because it does feel like it was meant to be a more topical Cold War thing. And I think maybe if it had come out 5 years later rather than just 1 year later, then it would have been received a little more warmly as like a kitschy throwback or something like that. Coming 1 year after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when like a lot of Soviet states are breaking up and it's pretty clear that the Cold War has ended, like just coming so close to it makes it feel like it's a little out of touch. And I think it's a movie that has grown a lot and is easier to look at now. And it's not the fault of the filmmakers at all. Like they didn't make a movie that was out of touch in that way, but they got shafted by their release date a bit.
Yeah, I also think that conversely, if this movie had been released in 1987 when principal photography was taking place, it could have been a hit still on the heels of Rocky IV, on the heels of Transformers the movie, on the heels of Red Dawn and Gymkata, and I think it would have. I genuinely think if this movie came out in 1987, it at least makes its budget back. It doesn't lose money, but again, it got kind of screwed by being in that limbo, and then by 1990, like you said, when this thing was actually being released, it's released to little fanfare. Now, it has since been reappraised by a lot of people, including the three people who are having a conversation right now. And so, John, I just want to tell this anecdotally really quickly. We've met recently in person and saw each other over the last few weeks. And so my friend, our buddy Adam Torkel, when I was telling him about the podcast, he said to me, "Oh, I got to introduce you to John Torrani because he's a guy you got to talk to." And I said, "Okay, great. Sure. Yeah. We're looking for people for the podcast. Sounds amazing." So then I went to Brooklyn 45 and I was talking to Ted Gagan, and he said, telling him about the show. And he said, "I got to introduce you to John Torrani." And I said, "Wow, this is a really serendipitous thing I'm hearing about it." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Nobody knows more about Robot Jox than John Torrani does." Yes. And I said, "Cool, and that's amazing." And then you and I met, and we had a really nice conversation. And you told me a little bit about, that you own some of the art and stuff like that. So I would like to kind of take this opportunity because I was going to say, I think this is a movie that deserved to be a hit, and I feel bad that it wasn't released at a time when it could be, but it's since been reappraised by people such as ourselves. So when did your fandom for Robot Jox begin, and kind of how did it grow and change, and what did you sort of accumulate along the way?
Okay, well, I have a timeline for this. So let's go back to what you said, Transformers 1986. That is actually the first film I ever saw theatrically. No, my parents didn't take me. They had a babysitter take me. But it was my first theatrical experience because I loved those giant robots. And also, I loved Voltron and Robotech. I loved the idea of a human being piloting a giant robot. So when I woke up and found Robot Jox, I was also at the perfect age where I had maybe grown out of Transformers and Voltron and Robotech, but I was enjoying films, more adult type content, and Robot Jox absolutely fit into that. I mean, a guy gets squished by a giant robot in the open. That's not a spoiler. That happens that's basically how the film opens. So right there, I'm watching human beings pilot robots that are practical effects. And that just always stuck with me. And I remember going to my cousin's house shortly after I saw it, and they had seen it too somehow. And we were talking about the movie, and we were saying how great it would be if they made a video game of it. Us not, I mean, it was to us, it wasn't a low budget movie. It was just, it was like any other movie. It also, I'd say what it had going for it is it has, what's his name? Sato from Karate Kid Part 2. Danny, I forget his name.
Kamakona.
Yeah, Danny Kamakona. And so there was even a recognizable star. It's like, oh, it's the guy from Karate Kid Part 2. This is a real movie, So we didn't look at it like it was a B movie. I always thought it was just like any other movie. I didn't understand budgets yet. I didn't understand real movies versus B movies, or A-list movies versus B movies. So then Robot Jox kind of exited my life for a time until I'm at the video store, and a lot of other video stores are closing around me. So I would always make it a point to go to a video store that was closing and buy whatever I thought was cool, whatever I could get for a few dollars. And at one of these stores, there it was. I hadn't seen it probably in 8 years, but there was Robot Jox. And of course, I started having to show it to people. I was showing it to all my friends at film school. And then because I was so into collecting stuff, at this point, I was trying to collect every this is the late 90s. I'm trying to collect every video store promo that I could find. So I'm looking for the standees, the mobiles, everything. And Robot Jox had a really cool 3D poster. It was a 3D embossed poster that was made out of plastic that was sent out as a video store promo. So I wanted to get one of those. And in searching for one of those, I found a guy selling a small lot of parts that belonged to the Alexander bot. And I said, well, it's not very much, but I'm going to buy those just so I can own some of the Alexander robot. This is in around 2000.
Okay.
So I get that off eBay. Okay, eBay is very different 20 years ago.
Very different.
You could type in Transformers and like 50 things would come up. You know, now what? 100,000, 200,000. That's impossible. You can't even. You know, you have to really narrow your search down. But back then, you could just put in like video store promo, and like 20 things would come up. It was very, very different. It was an amazing time. I was able to get those pieces, and DVD was coming out, and I always said I wanted a loaded DVD of Robot Jox. So I just, I'm just going to go through the timeline quickly. So as flash forward a few years, Masters of Horror is coming out. Stuart Gordon's appearing at Schiller Theater. I have to go. This is my first time meeting Stuart Gordon. I asked him about Robot Jox. He said Robot Jox is coming out on DVD from MGM. They put out a bare bones DVD, but I had to get it because I had never seen Robot Jox with the sides on it. I'd only seen the 4x3. Now I was getting to see it in 16:9. So I bought the bare bones DVD knowing that if they ever put it out again, I would buy it. Now it's around 2012. I'm cruising through eBay, and lo and behold, some of Steve Berg, production designer Steve Berg's drawings pop up on eBay. So I, of course, make it my mission, do what I have to do, pay what I have to pay to get those. And then maybe a month later, one of Ron Cobb's drawings pops up on eBay. And I do what I have to do. I get it. It's a beautiful piece. It's one of my best pieces. I contact the seller. I say, hey, like, I bought a couple of these things from you. Do you have any more? He's like, yeah, I do. And he sells them to me, original drawings, pretty affordably. I get a whole lot. I get about, like, 25 or something.
Wow.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I don't know how that guy got them, because the ones that were printed in Ron Cobb's coffee table book are like, Ron Cobb's coffee table book has Xeroxes. So I don't know how this guy got the original pieces. And also I'm an art collector so I know the difference between a copy and a original. So I don't know if I'm even supposed to have these, but I do. So come at me.
We'll keep your location disclosed.
Well, I should. Let's flash forward a couple years now. Stuart Gordon's doing the Edgar Allan Poe thing at Lincoln Center, so I show him on my phone all this art, and he's explaining stuff. He's like, "This one's unsigned, but that's Ron Cobb. This one is Steve Berg. This he said, I remember this. I rejected this for this reason." So I was able to show him, and I was able to get more information. Because my big question for Charles Band was, how did you hire Ron Cobb as the production designer for Robot Jox? And the short answer, because Ron Cobb was the production designer on Alien, Star Wars. He did concept art for Conan the Barbarian. Right after they stopped being able to afford to pay him on Robot Jox, he got hired to do The Abyss and Leviathan. So he was working on both of those films as soon as he left Empire. Basically, Stuart also said they couldn't afford to pay him. The article from Cine Fantastique says the same thing, and his like assistant, this guy Steve Berg, who we got for the Arrow set, also said, you know, Ron, he loves Ron, and Ron brought him onto the Abyss and Leviathan after Robot Jox. Because if you compare the two artwork, which you'll see on the, if you compare Steve Berg's artwork to Ron Cobb's artwork, which we do on the Arrow set, Steve was able to mimic his style flawlessly. It's like a seamless continuation of Ron's style. So anyway, so I get the artwork. It's great. Shout Factory is now doing a set. I contact them and I say, you have to interview Gary Graham. You have to interview Anne-Marie Johnson. I gave them like a list of things, and they were like, well, we're not doing any of that. We've got Alexandria Paul Costello. We have Stuart, and that's all we're doing. We weren't going to do anything. We were going to just put it out as like a 2-pack or something. But the fan reaction was so great that we had to do something. So, anyway, time passes. I can't even remember how, but I come to meet a guy named Carl. Okay, I don't want to say too much about Carl because he's a very private person. They credited him on the box set. I don't know if he's going to like that or not. But Carl, they credited you. Sorry, that was out of my hands. I didn't say that. I didn't say to credit you.
And Steve and I certainly had nothing to do with it.
You had nothing to do with it, Carl. Yeah.
Nothing to do with it.
But Carl happens to own more David Allen stop motion memorabilia than anybody. He has all kinds of stuff. And he's willing to part with some things. So he and I make a deal. I buy 2 pieces from Carl. I get the Achilles flying miniature that gets shot with the missile. Gets shot in the foot with the missile. And I get the referee floater from Carl. So I now have 2 legit screen-used David Allen made miniatures in my collection.
That's so awesome.
Okay.
So jealous of that.
Well, and then what's left of the Alexander explosion puppet from the end of the movie pops up at some prop house dealer based out of the UK. They're called the Prop Gallery. Lovely people. But they had sold it already. I didn't even get a chance to buy it. But then, miraculously, it ends up at a prop store auction. I do what I have to do. I pay what I have to pay. And I end up with it. And it's right behind me right now on the floor. I don't know if you can see it. But there it is.
Oh
wow,
God,
there it is.
That.
So
that is gorgeous.
So I have the other pieces that I bought on eBay 20 years ago that go to this. So I have since met a guy who restored the Achilles tank and another Achilles stop motion miniature, and this fall he's going to restore this for me. So I'm now in a quest to get as many of the pieces as I possibly can.
I feel like you have to at this point. It's like stuff has just kind of fallen in your lap in terms of like finding the right thing at the right time. It's like, why stop now? It's like at the rate you're going, you'll just you're in it. You'll accumulate everything at this point.
Well, Carl has 2. It's on the set, so I can say it. Carl has 2 of the stop motion miniatures. Basically, there's 2 kinds of miniatures from Robot Jox. There's rod puppets, which is what this is, and then there's stop motion miniatures. So David Allen did the second unit effect shots 2 different ways. So some are puppets where like you're just shooting a robot punching another robot, and then other ones are the stop motion one frame at a time photography.
I'm in love with like stop motion stuff. And the more I watch it, it has such a charm to me. And just to know that somebody has a hold of those miniatures, like we've professed on the show, because stop motion is not uncommon, and we'll talk about it a lot over the course of episodes that we do here. It's not uncommon in Empire and Full Moon Productions, and it's just one of those practical effects that has such this wonderful charm to me. And so it's the idea of holding an actual David Allen stop motion miniature in my hand is just so awesome. I wish I could have that in my hand right now.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
When you're in Brooklyn, I'm having a 4th of July barbecue. Come over. I've already told Adam. I've already invited Adam Torkel. So just come over. You can see everything.
Might have to take you up on that offer.
But the story's not over.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so my good friend Heather Buckley, who produces documentary feature, my good friend Heather Buckley, who produces DVD supplements, calls me and says, "I'm doing a Arrow Empire box set. Robot Jox is in there. Can we please come to your house and shoot your collection?" And I'm now over the moon. I'm like,
yeah.
Absolutely, come to my house, shoot all this stuff. They do. I narrate what everything is. And then I set them up with Carl. We go to Carl's house. We shoot his stuff. And then I get the set in the mail, like, last week. And they cut everything together. They cut, like, all of the shots of my collection. So there's a special feature of just me narrating my stuff, what it is. So I went from seeing this movie, waking up early as a 9-year-old, to now having a special feature on the Robot Jox Blu-ray of my dreams. I mean,
how incredible is that?
It's your
That's
livelihood
so cool.
now. It's not just a movie anymore. It's just it's a part of you now. And I'm trying to think, Steve, I'll posit this question to you also, like,
yeah.
So for John, for you it's Robot Jox. I'm trying to think now, like, if I had a film that where I could have the most sort of original paraphernalia and have it be this thing that keeps finding its way into my life, what would it be? I'm sort of basic in some ways, and I feel like I would go Halloween '78.
Okay.
well, good luck with that.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
Small. Guess sort of slightly
Man.
smaller scale.
Not to be
I
a
think.
jerk, but that's a tough one.
I don't know what I would go. I might say like an original, like, miniature of a graboid from Tremors, just because that was such a formative movie for me growing up.
I've seen
I
them.
love those designs. They're an incredible design. So, and I think they used miniatures, and they also did have like some
Phil
kind of
Tippett.
life size,
Phil
like
Tippett.
busts. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Phil Tippett, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The-
Yeah, incredible design on those creatures. I think those would be mine.
You-
So I mean, that's really incredible that you get to be involved. I full disclosure, we're not being paid by Arrow in any way to hype this, but I've pre-ordered my box set
Same.
like 3 months ago. I've been really eagerly awaiting this. For those who are interested in it, it's also going to include, aside from Robot Jox, it's also going to have Arena, Cellar Dweller, Dolls, and the Dungeon Master are all in that, and they're all like restored with new special
Loaded.
features, a gorgeous looking box. Like, I'm really looking forward to this thing.
Yep. Well, hey, it's good you guys pre-ordered it because everyone keeps saying it's almost sold out, which I can't believe.
Yeah.
A reviewer called it the release of the year, and I was like, "What?"
Oh my God.
I was like, "This is the Blu-ray release of the year."
I will say it's a gorgeous looking set. I mean, just from the photos of the box and the artwork and the individual jewel cases for the films and the work that went into it. I mean, if you're the person for whom this is designed, it's truly looks like a fantastic set.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I mean, that's really amazing, and that's so cool that you're kind of like on track to become like the preeminent Robot Jox scholar. Like, you're the expert on this subject. I mean, that's pretty amazing to be able to be like the person that the filmmakers go to as a resource.
Yeah.
That's got to feel pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say Stuart was a friend, but I had met him several times over the years. I'd been to his office. He's a very nice man. I mean, he never asked me anything or whatever. I mean, a lot of, like, as I became, I guess, okay, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say I am a friend of Barbara Crampton's.
Okay.
She did text me when she was, to make sure I had a ticket to Suitable Flesh.
I saw her 2 nights this week. I think that means we're friends.
Yeah, probably. Did you go to the Reanimator at Nighthawk?
I went to Reanimator too,
Yeah.
and I wore my Castle Freak shirt, and
Nice.
she, I showed it to her, and she said, you don't see many of those.
Right, yeah.
And I said, no, you don't. And I said, so we had 2 conversations within a 24-hour period because Suitable Flesh was the late night. when that was out.
Yeah.
And so it was within a 24-hour period we had 2 conversations. And as much as she might deny this fact, I'm going on the record and saying that we're friends now.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, I just need to move to New York at this point. Is what I'm hearing. Like I'm missing out. I don't get to meet anybody cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing I'm just going to say about her, and she's not in Robot Jox, but she's in one of the unofficials. She's in Robot Wars. She's the female lead in Robot Wars. I think, I mean, people say Scream Queen or whatever. The term, she really is setting herself up to be the queen of this genre. And her ability to reinvent herself is truly inspiring. I know, it's I don't even think she's had her most successful thing yet. I think her work as a producer and stuff, I think she's going to really surprise a lot of people, and I don't even think her best thing has happened yet. So
I mean, you've seen a really cool resurgence in her career in this last decade. Like ever since You're Next, I saw her in that. I'm like, holy shit, Barbara Crampton's back, and she's really fucking good in this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's been doing
she's amazing.
Fun stuff too with Ted, with Larry Fessenden, and people like that. And she's just we haven't gotten to a Barbara Crampton movie yet in anything that we've covered in our Empire or Full Moon. But when we do,
I guess her cameo in Puppet Master doesn't count. But yeah.
Oh, you're right. We
we
basically mentioned in that how she played Woman at Carnival, but we didn't really talk a whole lot about it. But when we do get to a film that she's prominently featured in, we will spend a lot of the time professing what huge fans we are of her work. And I think it's amazing how involved she is as a producer too. And she's so prolific and working so much now. And it's just, she seems to also have such a great attitude toward the genre, towards the fans, towards the people. And that's always just a really fun thing to see when someone embraces this niche fandom and they're not above it, they're not too good for it, they embrace it, and they make an effort to be friendly and talk to and ask questions to fans and stuff. No one is required to be that outgoing with fans, so it really says a lot when they are.
Well, and kind of tangentially, speaking about Robot Wars, I did want to touch on one other little fun aspect of the production on this, which is that there are 2 kind of unofficial sequels to Robot Jox. One of them is Robot Wars, which you mentioned. That one came out in 1993. Not officially involved in any way, but the tagline on the box said, first there was Robot Jox, now there's Robot Wars, which seems to heavily imply a connection, even though it's not there. The other one, which is worth mentioning, is called Crash and Burn, and this one came out in September of 1990, so 2 months before Robot Jox came out.
We've got a missing in action situation here.
That one is actually directed by Charles Band, and it was marketed as Robot Jox 2 in Europe. And I don't know his exact motivations behind that, John. Maybe you can speak to those, but it does seem kind of like a very Charles Bandian way of sticking it to MGM or to Transworld for taking Empire away from him. He's like, oh, okay, you got a robot movie coming out? I have one coming out 2 months earlier.
Yeah, I hate it when people say this on podcasts, because this is like a podcast answer. That's Charles being Charles. What else? I don't. I mean that.
We can really only speculate,
I don't wanna
but
put
just
words in his mouth or anything.
From reading his book and from everything I've gleaned about the man, that feels like a fun move that he would pull.
He and I are not friends. We're not enemies or anything, but I'm not gonna. I don't.
You've been called out, Ben.
No, he doesn't remember me.
You're gonna have to come on this show and defend yourself.
Yeah,
Ben.
he didn't like I said. I don't think he liked the way I was, trying to talk about some serious stuff on the panel or whatever. But it's fine. No, I mean, I revere him kind of for reasons that other people don't. I think he's. I think his main contribution, in my mind, is through distribution and through home video, That is
Yeah.
his contribution to the greater, like, film, the greater film art form. His contribution is he was at the forefront of people being able to own films and watch films in their house.
I mean, we've talked about
Yes.
that on the show. Like he was on the forefront of
Yes.
that. Like pretty much on every
Yes.
time like the home video market was emerging, he was the first one out the gate.
And you mentioned that in the Transfers episode, so I'm not going to really go other than say that I revere him for that.
Yeah.
So that
No, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
That's
same.
It's
again
important.
to repeat an anecdote from the Transfers episode. He opened like the first video stores in LA before people knew what video really was. Like VHS players existed, but they were catering to a very niche market that he anticipated would be big, and it was big within like 3 years, but he was just a little too early on that one. But I mean, I think that kind of sums it up. Like he's very eager, and he's very he jumps right on these trends like pretty.
Yeah, and those
Very
media home entertainment, that logo on the side of those VHSs, I had a bookshelf that I had put VHS tapes on in my bedroom when I was younger, and that media home entertainment logo, in addition to your Vestron videos and
Yes.
Canon and whatever, was so prominently featured. Like it was just when I see the media, and I have the media at home entertainment logo on a shirt, but when I see it, it's just this automatic. It just brings me back. I'm looking at my VHS collection. Most memorable for me is in my whatever the first iteration of home video, or maybe not even the first, but first I owned of Nightmare on Elm Street was the media home entertainment of those. The first movie and the first 4 sequels all were media home entertainment VHSs. So I had them all, lined up in a shelf, and it just looking at them, it's like I didn't really make, the connection initially. I didn't know who Charles Band was at the time, but it's like, his ability to distribute and to get movies into people's homes was a big deal and so formative for me. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to circle back a little bit and because we've talked about the production and we've talked about like a lot of kind of the overview stuff with Robot Jox. I want to kind of dig into the movie a little bit itself. Sure. Like what is it about this movie that kind of makes it endure? Specifically for you, John, since you've been such a collector and such an enthusiast of it. And what works, what doesn't work? Like what makes Robot Jox so special?
See, to me, it's a lot of things. Like I said, it's the childhood Transformers Robotech Voltron fan, the person who saw animated stories of people piloting robots, then getting to see a live action version of that. That really just that coupled with the story coming out of the Cold War, those two things together, like you said, had that hit earlier, it would have been definitely a much bigger success than it was. The things that work for me, and what I think, I would just like to there's a lot of things, so I'm just going to kind of do stream of consciousness right now, or maybe I should go back to my notes. But basically, if you look at the performances of Gary Graham and Anne-Marie Johnson, they are all played totally straight. They are, and this is why I think Gary ended up on Star Trek, is because he completely commits to this world, and he does it in a way that you buy it, you believe it. I believe that he's the last of a team of 10. The other 9 guys are squished by Alexander, and now his motivation is to he is a cog in the wheel that is the market, and he is going to do his job, and he is going to fight and kill Alexander, and he believes that, and Anne-Marie Johnson, the same thing. She completely, and I'm surprised that we didn't see her doing more sci-fi stuff after this, because Gary Graham, he's like, I called Barbara a Scream Queen. I don't know what you call a sci-fi version of a Scream King man, science
Space
man,
King,
Space King, whatever. But like, going from Alien Nation, Robot Jox, and then his work in Star Trek, he is forever intertwined with science fiction, and he absolutely commits to it, and I think that's why he's great. And that's I cannot picture the film with anybody else.
Yeah, and I could see Anne-Marie Johnson kind of taking on roles that she has a similar physicality to me to like Jeanette Goldstein.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
for sure.
That's a great comparison. Well,
it's also like pretty rare to see like a woman of color in roles this around this time,
design.
which is a pretty
that's by design.
Yeah,
that's by design.
Oh, of course.
And she talks about that. I didn't want to talk about it too much, but she talks about it on the Arrow set. Is that the idea is that all of the gen jocks who are genetically engineered, grown in the test tubes, they're all from different genetic material, so they all appear to be mixed race. And it's a subtle thing. It's not even mentioned. But if you look at it, you have Tex Conway and Achilles, and then behind them, there's all these clearly mixed race people. And it almost kind of does a subconscious separation where you're seeing like the two clearly white guys versus the rest of the new team that's coming that are clearly not white. So
well, and you think about the way that Achilles and Tex both approach these new characters too, where like Achilles is kind of ready to hang up the old Robo Spurs. You know, he's fine with the next generation coming in. He appreciates what they're doing, and Tex is just so resistant to it that spoiler alert for this movie, he's kind of subverting the entire program, and he's working to like sabotage the entire Robot Jox process, like from the inside. You know, and that's kind of an interesting take. And I think this movie has some very subtly, like really incisive and really funny things to say about the kind of performative masculinity of sports. No better illustrated than when Alexander and Achilles are fighting and he whips out his secret weapon, which is literally a big chainsaw dick. He is not only defeating his enemy, he is trying to shame him and prove that he's got the bigger penis going on. And I thought that was such a funny moment. And Stuart Gordon is a smart enough filmmaker to recognize that that's funny and why that's funny. You know, so this isn't just kind of like a cheap gross out thing. It's a commentary on this whole kind of ridiculous, like chest thumping idea behind war and sports.
And it still manages to be kind of a shocking moment. Like when it happens, like that, it's the kind of moment where if you watch this movie with somebody who's never seen it, there's definitely a moment of, wait a second, is this real? Is this really happening right now? And I enjoy it for that, because I feel like you can watch this movie 4, 5, 6, 7, 50 times, and you're still never fully prepared for it coming out. And then the way that the way that he is chopping through is sort of framed, also very, very intentional. And
again, to be clear, this is a PG movie. You know, this is not Reanimator. You know, this is not wall-to-wall splatter or anything like that. So the little moments of violence, like the doctor getting shot in the head, and there was the nice like blood spray on the back wall, like those little moments are pretty shocking. That they're managing to pull that off.
There's some butts in this movie.
There's some butts. There's some robot butts. All of those, yeah. And I don't know. I think. Again, I'm comparing it to Verhoeven, but weirdly, I just get such a Starship Troopers vibe off of this movie, because it's got the same kind of macho militarism that is sort of like masking like there's some fascist commentary going on in there. I don't think the market is necessarily meant to be fascist. No. I think this is a little bit more straightforward, rah, but it does have those subversive elements.
Here's the thing: they're called the market. So to me, this is very clearly a capitalist versus. They also don't really call the other guy. Do they call the guys the Confederation communists? I'm not sure.
I don't remember.
I don't believe I heard the word. I don't believe I heard the word.
Right. But it's clearly a United States and Soviet Union archetypes, and it really and so that's why I'm like I see your Verhoeven comparison to a point, but I'd say that's more tonally. I don't necessarily agree with the Starship Troopers comparison in that I don't think it's necessarily macho masculinity. I think it's more of kind of like how is kind of like how people watch the Olympics, where people
Sure.
want to see their country, beat every other country. That's my interpretation. I see is it more
Jingoism.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's nationalism.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. But that's going back to something that I'd say works about the film.
Yeah.
I was with that, because I loved Rocky IV and Red Dawn as a kid. So I immediately identified with the market, and I bought into the threat of the Confederation getting Alaska, which is a very, the idea of it's really very, like, there's a clear defined territory that they're fighting over, much like now.
Yeah.
Like if Robot Jox were to happen now, we would be fighting, NATO would be fighting the Russian Federation and China over the territory that is the Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and they even
Or
try to
Taiwan.
diffuse that, like by saying like, oh yeah, we are going to win Alaska, and there's kind of a chuckle in that moment, but then they explain it's like, yeah, we won Alaska. We've got oil, we've got timber, we've got like all these resources that are in Alaska. It's vast and it's untapped, and like there's a legitimate like fight for control over this. So they're pretty good at diffusing that seeming silliness of it. And I do want to like kind of jump ahead a little bit and just talk about Pacific Rim, which Guillermo del Toro, to the best of my knowledge, has not publicly acknowledged that this movie was an influence, but I have a hard time believing that it wasn't. Even a good portion of that movie takes place in Alaska, and Stuart Gordon has said that if he were to ever actually do a sequel to Robot Jox, it would be them fighting aliens.
Yes.
So it would be pretty similar to the movie Pacific Rim that we got in 2013, which is a very fun movie that I enjoy a lot. But that is this concept with like $100 million budget, like, and we get to really kind of maximize it and feel the scale. The knock that you could have against Robot Jox, and really, it really kind of depends on where you're coming from. And I find it incredibly charming, but I only saw this movie for the first time like 2 years ago or something like that, and it's pretty impossible to look at this movie in the early 2020s and think like, okay, these are miniatures. These are puppets. You never once feel the scale of it. And there are some moments like when Achilles' robot turns into a tank, like with the treads and it's rolling across the ground. It looks straight up like a G.I. Joe cartoon or a G.I. Joe commercial to me. Like it's advertising the latest playset. But at that point, I had bought in because the characters are likable. The conflict is spelled out clearly. It's got a nice
I
like
think,
hero's journey
Steve,
going on. It's
that's
pulpy,
one of
it's
the
entertaining.
things that makes it the most successful is that the premise is very clearly defined, and there's not a lot of unnecessary exposition or gobbledygook kind of just bogging it down. I feel like it's the market and the Confederation, and what they're doing is clear, and there's this side and there's this side, and you know why, and you understand the motivation of the different characters, and it's not overwrought, and
Well, it's the same reason why boxing is the most cinematic sport, when it's like not that prominent of a sport in real life, but on movies it's dynamite because it's so clear and it's so simple. It is one-on-one. It is just two people duking it out in the simplest way possible. This is not trying to overcomplicate it, like you said. This is basically just a robot boxing match. It's just you get the fun of having all these different secret features of the robots reveal themselves with each successive fight. Like, it's like, oh, okay, he's got a blinder now. He's got a laser cannon. Wait, he's got like this chainsaw bolo thing that can cut off arms? That's fucking cool. Like, it's always surprising you, and I will say for this movie too, we've watched a couple of movies on this show, like they've all been pretty short, but some of them have definitely dragged, even being like 70, 80 minutes long. Some of them have
Looking
felt
at
like
you,
they've had
evil
some
bong.
padding in it. We're looking at you. We're not taking a hit off you, but we're looking at you. But this movie moves. This movie is like over before you kind of realize it, because it's so fast paced and just really entertaining.
Well, as someone who works in post, I could tell you it is paced and edited flawlessly. It is
Really is.
It is a flawless. The pacing is so spot on, and I really can't say enough how well the post team did it with this film. Now, the editor who is credited on the film is it's like a team, and one of them is a guy that's going to come up a lot. It's Ted
Nicolau.
Nicolau, yeah.
Ted Nicolau is one of the 3 editors credited, and I mean,
we'll be talking about him a lot in the episode next week.
This is true.
And so I could tell you, I mean, with a lot of these guys, and especially with a lot of the low budget stuff, I mean, like editing and the pacing is really what separate, like being able to. It's almost I'm excited now because we're talking about something post related. So, just to articulate, especially when it comes to low budget things, people will forgive mistakes if they're having a great time. And when something is paced as well as this, you never have you don't have a minute, or you never have a second to settle and question what you're seeing. Like you kind of like strap in from the beginning, and then you're with it the rest of the time, and then before you know it, it's over. So
absolutely,
it's flawlessly.
We call that the Ramones
paced.
Model. The Ramones basically were in discussing their own music said, if you don't like the song we're playing, wait 2 minutes and it'll be over and a new song will be on. And I kind of feel like that's the mentality. Yeah. When you're dealing with a low budget property like this, if it's paced correctly and if it's edited correctly, it's like, yeah, because there's nothing worse than on obvious pacing problems in long films and in like long, like big budget overblown films too. Cause I feel like they're magnified.
Yeah.
This is my biggest problem with Hollywood films right now is editing and pacing.
They're so bloated.
Huge
like
problem.
even movies that I like they are overlong, like by a significant amount, and sometimes it's hard to motivate yourself to go and sit down and watch a 2.5 hour long movie. It just is. Like, movies can be the length that they need to be, but I would argue that a lot of those modern movies do not need to be those lengths.
Absolutely.
So I don't really have too much else. I wanted to turn it over to John before we wrap up here and just see if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about with Robot Jox. Other than to say, I had a great time rewatching this. I've seen it twice now. I've had a great time both times. I'm excited to do it again when I get my my box set next week, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the new Blu-ray is going to contain. But yeah, was there anything else you wanted to add?
I'd like to just talk about the Blu-ray set a little more, and the importance. This kind of ties into Charles Band and the idea of owning a movie and physical media as a whole. I'm going to kind of, when I was talking about the nuclear holocaust and stuff, I was serious that time. Now I'm going to be serious again one more time, in a almost scary way. So when it comes to companies like Arrow, who really take care in putting together these really great DVD releases with extras and beautiful transfers and everything, people really should take a look and think about owning their favorite movies. I probably have about 1,000 titles. You don't need to own 1,000 titles, but I would say you should really go out of your way to own your favorites, because I hate to say this, Fahrenheit 451 can happen, and I know people are like listening to this laughing like, John, they're never going to send around guys with flamethrowers to burn our physical media, and I'm going to say they don't need to. You gave your physical media up already. They don't need to send guys around with flamethrowers because they have the delete key. You made it way, 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 way easy. They don't need, so.
And just to be clear, if you're thinking like, oh, it's okay, I paid $9.99 to own the digital copy on Amazon. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I've had many movies removed forever, and that money's just gone.
So that's why go out of your way to own your favorite films, because don't rely on streaming. Don't rely on because if they decide that if whoever the way companies get bought and sold now, the way things are absorbed, it's already happening. Films are being censored, or films are being altered from the original director's intention. So your favorite movie may not be your favorite movie when you watch it on streaming. If you have a release that you like and you love, even if it's like the DVD from the 90s, hold on to it, because it'll always be the same every time you go back to it, and you can watch it every time you want. And it doesn't matter which company, absorbed this other big company, and now, they don't think that, they want to project a certain sensibility or something. So that's why I think companies like Arrow are important. And there are a lot of other great places out there that are doing really great releases that, so definitely, check them out. Make sure that if there's a movie that you love, that you own it. And, just that concept, we have Charles Band to thank for.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Amen. I second that. Yeah, I'm a big physical media proponent.
That's the man behind our whole mission statement here. So, John, before we wrap up here, where can people find your work? Is there anything of yours you want to plug real quick while we say our goodbyes?
No, I'm just going to say, take a look at the Arrow's. Oh God, I keep saying it wrong. It's a mouthful. Check out Arrow's Enter the Video Store Empire of Screams. Great set. I agree. That guy who called it the release of the year, it's the release of the year. I'm on it. We're talking, Heather Buckley and I, we're trying to convince them to do a volume 2. We're trying to figure out what could possibly be on it. So we're just talking right now, nothing serious. But I mean, hey, if the first one sold out, obviously we're going to want to do another one.
I can't wait.
And if they want a couple guys to do random movie commentaries, we're happy to jump on.
Nominate us for those jobs.
Just putting that out there.
Oh, so if you are a fan of the show and you've liked what you've heard so far, then jump on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Rate and review the show. It will help us reach a wider audience. If you've liked what we've done so far, give us a nice 5-star review and a kind rating. If you haven't liked what you've heard so far, I find it hard to believe you made it through this whole episode. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, you would have tapped out much.
If you want to follow us on
you like us.
Instagram at Puppet Masters _ Castle Freaks on Instagram, and you can follow me. I am _cowboy _ Jerry. Steve, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me at Minotaur Matador on Instagram, and I also run the social media sites there. I'm also on another podcast called Cinema Arcade. You can find that anywhere you can download podcasts. And just thanks again to John Torrani for being here and for lending us your expertise on this. This is a fun conversation.
May I say one more thing?
Of course.
Please.
If you happen to own anything from Robot Jox, please find me on social media. I have money. I will pay for anything from Robot Jox. John Torrani. He will
do what he's got to do. He will pay what he's got to pay.
It's just there's only one John Torrani in the United States. Torrani. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything. Find me. I will give you money for your Robot Jox items.
Well, amazing. Well, thank you again so much. Everybody be sure to tune in next week. We've got a seminal full moon movie to talk about, because we are going to be discussing the 1991 film from director Ted Nicolau, Subspecies. We are watching the first of the Subspecies films, and we're going to have a really good time talking about that. We're not adding our Robot Jox to the rankings list just yet, because I think we're recording out of order. I think we hadn't started doing the rankings list yet. For the record, this is my current number one of the movies we've watched. Robot Jox is my current number one. It's just edging out Trancers.
And this is this is my number 2, just edged out by Trancers.
There we go. Perfect. All right, everybody. Well, we will see you next time. Have a great evening and goodbye.
See you later, Tubies.